Well, hi everybody. My name's Emma Loftus. I'm a biodynamic craniosacral practitioner for horses and humans. I want to extend a big thank you to Tejas Sweeney and PACT for doing this webinar. And a massive thank you to Ian for coming along to talk about his upcoming seminar in Melbourne, the 22nd, the 23rd, and the 24th of October this year for CSTs and BCSTs on practitioner presence. I'm going to just introduce Ian, if that's all right. I'll introduce you a little bit. So
Of course.
Ian has taught pediatric and cranial osteopathy for over 30 years internationally and is on the faculty of postgraduate diplomas in pediatric osteopathy in a variety of countries from the UK, Ireland, Italy, Germany, Brazil. Ian founded the Daisy Clinic in 2009, a postgraduate teaching clinic treating children with special needs whilst training osteopaths in pediatrics in Ireland. And Ian is a fellow of the Sutherland Cranial College in the UK. Ian has 3 books published: Dynamics of Stillness, Healing Anxiety, and most recently, The Therapeutic Odyssey, all available on Amazon. I was able to, I had a very special treat this past weekend. I traveled out to Ireland to come and observe the Daisy Clinic and really got to see it in action. And I think what you've created there is fantastic.
Fun,
So
huh?
welcome, Ian. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. It was, and that was great. I've just arrived back. I've just been running and I'm really hot. So if I'm like using towel, don't worry. It's just really hot here today. A bit hotter than Ireland. I'm in Italy.
Oh, you're back
So
in Italy.
I'm back in
Amazing.
Italy. Where are you?
Well, I'm great. I'm in the south of France. It's tough. It's tough, isn't it? It's
Tough, isn't
really
it?
hot.
Mine, mate. No, it's
Yeah,
awful.
it's really hot here. Like the train stopped working and everything. So I got picked up. So I really wanted to. So if you could really talk to these guys about because I first came across Ian through Craniosacral Therapy Educational Trust when you co-taught with Mary Bolingbroke, and I'd love for you, if you wouldn't mind, just telling us again about how Mary got you really
Yeah.
involved
I
in
mean,
teaching
yes.
CSCs.
Yeah, Mary was always, well, she used to go to the Breath of Life conferences actually, that Michael would, which had always had brilliant speakers, and I never got around to going to them. Anyway, Mary said, "Look, you really need to come and hang out with the and do some teaching with the craniosacral therapists because I've always taught osteopaths before." And I was, because there's this reluctance across professions kind of thing. And so one time I actually agreed. I said, right, let's do, and I can't remember. It was about 5 years ago. Maybe even more. I don't know. I think we maybe did a mother and baby course. But what happened was I was completely struck
I've spotted
by,
you. Yeah.
can you see me?
Yeah.
Are we still recording? Something's happened.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
I've just spotlit you for everyone.
okay, that's fine. Sorry. I can just see myself now. Yeah, it's that I just found it really quite lovely actually working with biodynamic craniosacral therapists because they were much more open to growing and learning and having new ways of doing things, and I just really enjoyed the process. So ever since, I mainly teach osteopaths, but I do teach still at the Craniosacral Educational Trust. I do 2 courses a year in different subjects. The kind of courses that I teach, of course I do pediatrics and mother and baby stuff, but I do one on some stuff on neurodiversity, some stuff on the neuroendocrine immune continuum, the practitioner's journey, which is actually one of my favorite courses actually. And I do one on the heart, which I really love actually. I just taught that here a couple of weeks ago. And that's the cardiovascular system it's just extremely beautiful way of working. Stuff on transitional times, and then I've got another course on where we look at fields and fulcrum, and which we will explore on this course. So the course that I'm coming over in Melbourne, we're going to do it's the kind of practitioner's journey, and that was inspired really. You don't mind if I just carry on talking, do you, Emma?
No,
Just
please do. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I love where you're going.
That was inspired by my personal lack of self-insight in in the journey to become a practitioner. I qualified as an osteopath when I was 22 years old, and I was thrown in. I had a very fortunate teachers. I was taught by some of the best osteopaths in the cranial field that you could actually be taught by, including people like Stuart Korth and Jim Jellis, and I was thrown into treating extremely complex cases. This is over 30 years ago, including, of course, people who have trauma, etc. And the whole kind of trauma movement was not awake then. It was, it was something that was not so beautifully understood and processed in those days. And so I was 22 years old, dealing with people who I was way out of my depth for, and working with very complex systemic illness and people who were dying, and people going through massive transitions. That's another course of mine, is to do with transitions. And trying to make my way through that, and not realizing, of course, that I had a wound. And when you're working in psychotherapeutic circles, usually you go through a process of understanding mentorship, understanding your own process. But certainly in osteopathy, it's better in craniosacral stuff. There is no understanding of the wound and the process of that, and so that culminated in maybe sort of, by the time I got to my mid-late 30s, I had a massive dramatic illness crisis, which taught me a lot of great lessons. I nearly died, and I had heart and kidney failure and all this kind of stuff, and it was a massive learning process for me. And so it obviously made me engage and look at the therapeutic process as a process for and I think everybody who engages with another person in a therapeutic situation, probably even if you're just actually, you're the hairdresser, right? You're engaging with a therapeutic mirroring, and that brings you into relationship with yourself. And what that does is that brings you into relationship, or highlights this wound, this primary wound, which we all have to a greater or lesser degree. There is a wound in us. And so from that wound, we have two paths. One path is to do what I did, which is like run away from it and party and forget it and work really hard. And the other is to actually look at it. And so that's the basis of that kind of therapeutic journey. And then you're looking at things like really engaging with primary health within ourselves, looking at things like the internal judge, looking at transference and countertransference, and actually how that transference continuum, it can be actually extremely important and positive in terms of therapeutic process. Looking at the idea, there's themes that come up in the therapeutic journey, which are a question I always get asked by students is how do you protect yourself? And the idea of being protected versus the idea of being transparent, for example, and the idea of compassion versus empathy, and the whole idea of being an empath as opposed to processes of compassion. And then compassion fatigue, of course, which I think we all, when you're working with a lot of people, we can get, and it can really happen to all of us, definitely. The idea of dealing with our own journey, and our own journey can lead us to places that lead towards a dark night of the soul. And that is a really key and important stage in our personal spiritual process. And it's not necessarily discussed openly. I mean, it is in certain in mystical traditions in the East and the West, it's discussed as a spiritual, which is a beautiful thing, and it is discussed in some psychotherapeutic things. But actually, we often get, when we're often introduced to patients or clients, say, who are going through a potential dark night process, and I think it's really important that we can understand that process, so we can act like Virgil to Dante as he goes through those layers of hell, and so we can hold our Dante patients' hand, and so they understand where they are to some degree. And I think that when we understand that process, it leads to gold. It leads to transformation, transubstantiation. It's very powerful. So that's the kind of things that I was exploring. So this course that I'm giving, called the kind of Practitioner's Odyssey, Practitioner's Journey, I look at that. I look actually very much about self-care and rest, deep rest and self-care. And a lot of that is actually inspired by my teacher, Jim Jellis, who really taught me a lot on the idea of rest. I mean, I'm a really busy person, but and I'm still learning how to rest. But actually, there's some beautiful processes in terms of really resting in your wholeness and self-care on a very deep level. So those are the elements that kind of inspired the course. But the course is made up of a lot more than that. It's an introduction, I suppose. It starts as an introduction to fields, fulcrums, and midlines, because I work a lot, as Emma knows, I work a lot there's a lot of autistic children, and we have to understand fulcrums of engagement and whole processes of actually allowing people to be in their body. You can't treat someone if they're not in their body, and that's a whole process in itself. I'm increasingly interested in this idea of fields. When you start to look at sort of the idea of the what Jim Jellis would call the fluid body, and I think in biodynamic craniosacral therapy it's called the biosphere. But increasingly in a lot of scientific terms, it's called the biofield, which I quite like, the biofield, which is, you could say, this is like a complex dynamic field of energy flow, which surrounds us, but also interpenetrates us. And it has electromagnetic, it has thermal, it has acoustic, it has photonic elements, and it is coordinated and comes into a places of coherence. It includes things like the huge electromagnetic field of the heart, which is 5,000 times that of the brain. It includes the brain's electromagnetic field, but also the connective tissue matrix, cellular matrix. And these together form patterns of coherence and discoherence. But what I'm very interested in, and I was talking about this a little bit on the last weekend that when we were doing the pediatrics in Ireland, is the idea of actually trying to read the biofield. The biofield acts preconsciously. Okay, so our fluid body, our biosphere, our biofield interrelates with another's or an environment that we're in pre-consciously. So we react before we even know it. Yeah, it's our biofield, like when you're testing someone's biofield. So, and we go through this on the course. If you're testing for, like you would in terms of kinesiology, you're testing if someone is intolerant, say, to gluten or dairy, or what kind of medication they take, or what it should take, or et cetera, et cetera. It's pre-conscious, it's a reaction, and it's very dynamic, and you can see it very clearly. And so I spend a lot of my time, some of my patients are very have severe situations, like very severe mast cell activation, where they can't even drink the water. Very, very severe stuff. So I spend a lot of my time testing that water's okay, that's not okay, okay, no, you need to cut down on that medication. But you're reading it through the biosphere and the biofield. But what I'm interested in is also using it as a diagnostic tool, because when the old osteopaths back in American Midwest, when they were working in the early 1900s, and they were, say, working in the hospitals, and there was no antibiotics. This is the times pre-antibiotics, where this is some of the best research actually in osteopathy is when it was done when in pneumonia pandemics, like in the flu, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1917, where there was nothing to treat it, and actually they were treating it using osteopathic techniques, and the osteopathic techniques would have this incredible effect, incredibly positive effect. I can't remember what context I was trying to say that, but this biofield, this field of engagement, yes, that's the point I'm trying to make, was about actually reading. So say if someone comes in and they have, like the children on the last weekend we were working, say a child has parasites or they have a certain type of virus, to actually learn to say, yeah, this person has COVID-19, or this person has whatever bacteria, parasite, fungus. A lot of autistic children have fungal infections, and to be able to use it diagnostically. And as we work with it more and more, you can read things, and you also read, obviously, this biofield and its relationship with other fields, other relational fields, which is to do with the environment, to do with other people, a dynamic relational field, and fields, and bringing coherence in other fields, like ancestral fields and other fields that have an effect on this biofield, which creates us. That's the point, is it creates who we are. And learning to work with this and actually bring coherence to this mixture of a whole lot of different things is really, I think, one of the things that we're extremely good using biodynamic osteopathy or craniosacral therapy. This is one area we can really work beautifully with. So that's one subject. This course has, I focus usually on the kind of restoration of our senses. I really love working with senses and sensory meditations. But, our senses early on are overwhelmed, especially a lot of the children that we see nowadays. And they're patterned linking to our belief systems, linking to overwhelm, shut down, switch off. And this idea of repatterning, renewing, restoring wholeness to our senses is an area that I've been interested in for a long time. And I've in the past run courses out in nature where you go through this process of restoration of the senses so they become renewed. And I think it's a really important. So I suppose this course is a few different threads of areas that I kind of like, sort of favorite areas. Another of which is nature, connection with nature. And we have this incredible tool, which is the kind of the great tide, the tide, which can restore our connection to nature very naturally and restore ourselves into the natural slow rhythms. And it's very beautiful to do that. So that whole idea of connection and oneness with nature, restoring that process, which brings us into sort of slightly more towards, it's a one way of looking, of taking us towards slightly more non-dual states of being. When we're looking at fields, though, also, I'd like to look at because the background of most biodynamic craniosacral therapists and a lot of osteopaths nowadays, there is the biodynamics comes from the embryology. I really like to look and explore at looking specifically at some of these biodynamic and biokinetic embryological fields and how they express us and how they are with us throughout our lives, and how we can, as therapeutic practitioners, engage very specifically with these biodynamic fields which remain in us and bring us back into health, but in a very specific way. Like I do some work with, when I'm doing the heart course, I look at the biodynamic fields of the heart when you're working with children with congenital heart issues, for example, or you're looking at some of the formative forces of the brain when you're looking at neurodiversity. But you can do that with any organ system or any system in the body. But very precisely, if we can really engage with some of these biodynamic forces that are present in the body, we can feel them. It gives a great potency to the treatment that we're working in. So this kind of causes a bit of a mishmash of a few different things that kind of hopefully tie up, but they're all, I suppose, within the theme of biodynamics, and the field of working with these are fields of connection, fields of interrelationship, but without certainly with engaging with nature, because actually this is all we're doing really, is we're exploring nature. That's all we do when we're working with our patients. We're exploring nature both within ourselves and within another person. And I suppose, as we all know, that when we're engaging with another, and what a great beauty about engaging with another and meeting the potential health in another is it brings us into a relationship with our own health. But on that process and that journey towards coming to our own health, we meet certain things certain things we didn't maybe want to look at, which are in our history and in our past. And that gives us a great opportunity as a therapist, as a practitioner of any kind, to grow. And in the end, actually, it comes down to self-compassion. And the deeper our relationship with our own health, the deeper our relationship with our own self-compassion, compassion for ourselves, which is a form of self-acceptance, and just a form of just letting ourselves be ourselves, can allow our nervous systems to rest more deeply. But as we rest more deeply in ourselves, we become more transparent. And as we become more transparent, we become more able to become a deeper presence for the journey and the very special journey that the person who comes in the door to see us, and the gift of that interrelationship, that interaction, be that a brand new baby or someone who is heading towards a transition at the end of their life and everything in between, it can make that therapeutic intervention or therapeutic dynamic, let's say, a gold. It can be alchemic and very, very beautiful. And in the end, that's all it is. That's what all of this work is, really. And it is about looking towards restoration of wholeness in the other, but actually restoration of wholeness in ourselves. And that's the journey. It's like people say, well, gosh, you treat a lot of patients, and I say, well, I need a lot of treatment, because actually when you're engaging with another and you're meeting the health in another, you have to meet the health in yourself. So actually there's a therapeutic process that happens in you as well, and an alignment, hopefully, towards your health. And that's a really important and key part of what we're doing. So this course is, I suppose, time and space to explore some of these processes and some of these ideas and some of these connections, and also some of these potentials for coherence, this idea of islands of coherence, in this crazy world that we're living in, finding and meeting potential coherence in ourselves, in another person. And then that goes out into the community. We were in a community clinic in the weekend, and those patterns of coherence and how they ripple out into the community. And I love that. That's the great beauty of what we do and the great gift of what we do, actually. That's enough of me bantering anyway.
I love that, Ian.
Questions?
Thank you.
I say something different
So
every time, I know. I suppose that's probably
no,
okay.
I love it. I was like, you're channeling right now. No, that was really good. I think you are. I was going to ask you about you talk a lot about developing the sensorium, in your books, and you covered that really nicely. And
But I mean, the
I've
thing
attended.
is I mean, as when you're an osteopath, you learn, I mean, it's craniosacral therapists, it's a lot better, right? First of all, where as osteopaths, you learn to do something to someone. So it's efferent, yeah. But actually, our work is afferent, completely afferent. When I used to go on courses many years ago with Jim Jellis, who was important in founding biodynamic craniosacral work, and after the first session, I'd be with a friend and we'd be like, oh, okay, we understand, don't do anything, stop doing stuff. It's like you're being present, and so what happens is your senses just breathe, and you're exploring this beauty of nature in this child or in this person. And you know it's doing less. It's always doing less and being more. But you guys don't have to de-educate yourselves as much as some of the osteopaths I treat. It's much easier. I remember teaching a course many years ago, about 20 years ago, on developing the senses. And there was a group of people who were on this kind of retreat with me. And there were all sorts of people, writers and artists. There was even an embalmer who was on the course. It was great. No one who was involved with health stuff. And so, you teach people, and you get people to get onto the tide and get people to engage with, the fields of plants and, engaging with nature and trees and all this kind of stuff. And then I got them to start feeling nature in the person, the expression of the tide, the expression of primary respiration. And they could all feel a whole world of things, which is really interesting, because when you're teaching osteopaths for the first time, this kind of work, they're so used to doing stuff that they can't feel it. And so actually it's like that beginner's mind thing. And, with a lot of the people I work with, having to de-educate people so that they become sensory and open, as opposed to, imposing a thought idea onto a patient, which is not helpful, actually, in what we're looking at. Yeah. But actually,
I was gonna.
go on.
No, I was just say, if anyone has any questions, I might pin your screen so that people can ask you directly. Is that all right? If we have some
Absolutely.
questions.
I don't know what you mean, but I'll go with that.
Yeah, I think it's so you'll be spotlit again.
Okay, no, that sounds good.
I'm a tech dinosaur. Let me see.
Well, no,
Spotlight.
you sound more advanced than me.
Okay.
I'll do that, Emma. I can just spot
Okay.
him, and then everyone can start asking questions. So they won't be on the screen, but Ian would be on the screen. So, it's recorded, and it's for privacy for everyone as well. Okay.
You can put your questions in the chat as well if anyone wants to. Otherwise, unmute yourselves. Okay.
Yep. Ian, if you're seeing
I have a
yourself,
question.
if you're seeing yourself, then you can just go on your view for as a gallery view, so you can see everyone, and then all of
Yes.
us will be able to just see you.
I don't mind seeing. Well, it's like.
Yeah. Okay.
Later tonight, I'm doing a meditation, which is like this evening in European time, which is done by it was put together by the Russian, I think they're craniosacral people, to reach out to the Ukrainians. And it's like an hour meditation. It's on tonight. That if you want to, maybe Emma will have that information. And it's just an hour of people around the world coming together and doing a kind of meditation. I tend to do it once a month, and other people do it, like Michael does it. And it's quite nice actually to spend an hour. But it's interesting that I'm doing this meditation and I'm looking at a picture of myself. It's kind of weird. But anyway, there we go. Any questions?
I have a question, Sarah
Yeah.
Perry here. and what you're talking about is absolutely fascinating. So sorry, this is probably rather a boring question because it's more about the.
I like boring questions.
It's more about
Please.
the structure of your course, because I'm just intrigued, having gone to a lot of BCST postgrads where the format is kind of a lot of kind of discussions and, you know, explorations of some of the things you talked about. And then do you have table time where you have exchanged
Yes.
sessions? So it's kind of quite
Yes.
similar to the format of the sort of postgrads that we're used to going.
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, I tend to, in terms of practice, I tend to use what's there, and I tend not to have a script as to what practical we do, because I tend to like it to be fresh. But sometimes it's a sensory meditation. It depends really, and sometimes it's because sometimes there are people who are doing it remotely. But there's definitely, I like table time. It's nice to, I mean, what we do is very much engaging, even though we all work kind of remotely now. But actually, it's so nice to actually be there, be present, and work directly, hands-on with other people. And it would be really, you know, it wouldn't be such fun without doing that. So I definitely do that. There's lots of time for, always, I think, for the physical exploration of some of these ideas that we're looking at. Very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great learning tool, I think, you know, to meet with other practitioners and to feel other people's hands on you who are so experienced. And yeah, it's really
the best.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
you
much.
can't beat that. Yeah, there's no point in chatting. Yeah. Let's see if I've missed something. But anyway, this course, I did the course first, and then I decided to kind of write up the ideas of the course into the book, The Therapeutic Odyssey, because I thought, oh, that actually would make quite a good book. So I wrote it into a book. I mean, it's not the whole course, but it's just some of the ideas on the therapeutic journey. So which I kind of put into a book. I've got a copy in Italian here.
Brilliant. It's a great book. I love it. I wanted to say something, because I did attend the course online from Australia.
Did you?
When you did it? Yeah. And I particularly remember one table session that you led us through where we were working with the eyes.
Yeah.
Because my practice partner, who wasn't not a craniosacral practitioner, could not believe how much better she seemed to, her eyes felt alive afterwards, as you led us through a sensory practical on the eyes. So I just thought that was fantastic. And from my own experience of, you know, learning biodynamic and equine craniosacral for a number of sources, I particularly like where I'm going in my learning with you, Ian, is that I'm able to start to sense with my whole body, and the hands are just there, which I really like. It's very key to this work, isn't it?
Oh, completely. And because we are entirely sensory. Every cell is sensory. Every cell membrane is sensory. So actually, our senses are far beyond putting our hands on, actually. But our hands are great. I think our hands are fantastic for engaging with people, and they're beautiful because they connect deeply with our hearts. And there's nothing better than holding someone and support, especially we're working obviously with babies. But we sense with our wholeness, and that's actually, thank you for that, Emma, because that's actually part of it, is that whole idea of repatterning senses. But actually in the end, you're going to this kind of this felt sense which comes from our wholeness. It's very deep, it's very instinctual, and it's within every cell in our body, actually. And it's it deepens that, doesn't it, that process. But also, like, the senses, like, for example, it's not the eyes, it's vision. The sense is much bigger than just our eyes and the visual pathways and the visual cortex, the optic chiasma, et cetera, et cetera. Vision is a much bigger sense, and we really start to kind of get a feeling, or acoustic sense is much bigger than just our hearing and the auditory pathways. and actually to feel it as a wholeness of a sense when we're working with people is very nice. And actually that works therapeutically very beautifully when you're treating people with issues with their senses specifically. Yeah.
Could I ask you another question, Ian? Sorry, I don't want to dominate the questions, but I'm intrigued by your training as an osteopath, and obviously, you know, the training that you have with Jim Jealous was a kind of, you know, erring on biodynamic craniosacral therapy type training. But when you work with clients, do you mainly work in a biodynamic craniosacral therapy sense now, or do you sometimes work osteopathically and have a doing intention? I'm just really intrigued to know what in the pathway that you have gone now.
It's
how, you know, how you sort of balance the doing and the non-doing, if you have had that training.
Yeah, there is I mean, there's when I'm doing, I used to do run courses in developing palpation, I used to call them, but it was developing perception courses. And there's this line between intention, which is like manipulation, and then there is just sensing wholeness, so the very lightest form of pure attention, which there isn't in the end, right? Pure attention, if you are absolutely purely in a sensory field of attention, and when you start to feel something unfolding within that wholeness, there is still the slightest, by you meeting whatever process is there is a therapeutic engagement, which still has pre-conscious intention within it. The intention may be just for health, but there is. And so, you know, it's the whole idea of witnessing something. It engages with it in a therapeutic way. So that line between doing everything and nothing, there is no nothing. That's the point, I would suggest. You can't find that nothing. So I haven't, how I personally practice have done for 30 years before I even met Jim Jealous was looking at the expression of, that's how I learned, looking at the expression of potency within the whole. Where's the power, the potency, the ignition, the potency, and looking at how that expresses itself. And what I learned very quickly was actually the less that I try and lead what's happening in the therapeutic process, the better it is result-wise. So I learned very early on to do that. And certainly Jim Jealous's work is, you know, you're looking for the motion present in the health. And that's where and it's interesting. I was reading just yesterday when was it yesterday or the day before, when there was the guys were doing a practical in my clinic, and I was reading a book by a guy called John Lewis, who's a colleague of mine actually, who wrote it on Andrew Taylor Still. And there was a little quote of when Still was working with this young person who had an systemic infection from a cut, and Andrew Taylor Still sat there for like a long period of time and did nothing. And everybody in the room was like, he's going to do nothing. And in the end, he did a little bit of movement of the limb, and obviously the infection went away and everything was better. But I think that even Still, the founder of osteopathy, was very much engaging with the head. I mean, you know, he obviously his famous quote was, anyone can find disease. You know, the key point is finding the health. You know, and when we're working with in clinic with kids who have really a lot of pathological processes, or, you know, they're having to cope with a lot of conditions, say really difficult conditions, we cannot engage with the lesion field because it's too overwhelmingly difficult for the child and the practitioner to do so. We have to be entirely focused on the expression of the health. And so that's a premise of osteopathy. Now, is there some intention? Sometimes when there is, maybe you can engage with something a bit more strongly. Some people occasionally need to be engaged. you know, I would love, last week, I obviously do a lot of teaching. Last weekend I was in Barcelona and I was with a guy and we were doing a pattern around the first breath. And he was trying to wait for the potency to come back, I think around the umbilicus. And I said, no, come on, meet it, engage it. This person needs to be met more, engaged more. But that was that person in that moment. And now, is that intention or is that just a way of meeting? So I think that it's interesting, the idea of therapeutic engagement on that line of doing less and less and less and becoming less and less more and more afferent, less and less efferent, is that actually, I think, where osteopathy came from. It just got a bit lost on the way in terms of its journey, and it's interesting that, you know, I've witnessed the teaching of now more closely. My wife has just done the course, or just about to complete the course in London of biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and the very interesting thing about that is it's more osteopathic in its essence than osteopathy that's being taught, which is terribly sad for me as an osteopath. But actually, it's beautifully osteopathic because these principles are being taught. These principles, which is meeting the health, engaging with wholeness, yeah, and bringing the person back to a place of wholeness, and that is very beautiful. And that's partly probably why that I'm working more with you guys, because, you know, it aligns more to actually the principles which I love, which is a holistic principle, which is what we're taught in college, in school, as an idea, but the practical reality that's been done has not, unfortunately, that. And I don't want to be negative on osteopathy, because you know, I love it and it's been my career always, but it's osteopathy has a crisis to some degree, unfortunately. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Monica has just got a question saying, I'd like to ask Ian about his approach to teaching or facilitating the Dante process.
The what play process, sorry?
Facilitating the Dante process. You know, he was talking earlier about, yeah.
Dante process. I like it. Let's call it the Dante process.
Yeah.
As we're in Florence here, we'll go for that. Dante. It's better than the Dark Night of the Soul, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe we should call it that, the Dante process.
The Dante process. I love it.
It's the point. When it comes to that, I think the first point about that is just an understanding. It's like understanding as a practitioner. It's easier if you've been through it, but we've all been through it to greater or lesser degree. Some people quite, you know. And especially as practitioners, often we've been through dramatic versions of that. Yeah, but everybody goes through it to a greater and lesser degree. Okay, it's when, you know, from a Eastern and Western mystical point of view, it's when that everything goes dark and everything is lost. You go, I mean, in Christian mystical traditions, there's light and then the light goes, yeah? And so there is no light. So you have to move onwards in darkness, just with the idea and hope that there can be something else, because all light goes. And that is a culmination of and it's a fascinating area. It's a culmination of a sequence of crises emotionally and in their environment that people go through, where everything just goes to hell. And, you know, it's a crisis of the ego, because in the end, our way of thinking, our way of being in the world cannot go on. It's just, it won't work. And we lose everything. We lose everyone. We lose everything that is, and I work with people who are like, it's crazy how much they, you know, they in a metaphorical way, that, you know, that one of my patients, it's like literally cannot even drink water. You know, it's that intense in some people, but most people, it's, thank God, is less intense. But you go through an illness, or you go through a emotional crisis where your relationship breaks down, or or you lose an animal or something like that, or a loved one or of any kind, can trigger this process. But often it's more to do with our way of being in the world just doesn't work anymore, and it goes. And so what happens is you can get into this place of darkness where there is no light, there's no way forwards. And that's a spiritual and a psychological thing at the same time. Can be more in one way or more in another way. And you're blind, and it's dark, and there's you can only move on with the idea of hope. And in the end, as a practitioner, we can say, all we can say is, I understand where you are. Actually, I understand where you are, and I can hold your hand here, and let's just wait, and it's okay. And this is a dark night moment. And so people know that there is a process. What happens with a lot of people when they're going through that process is they don't know they're in it. It's just hell. Everything's breaking down, everything is in crisis, and they have nothing to hold on to anymore. And for them just to understand that this is a spiritual, emotional process that they can come out of, I think is hugely helpful. And so this Dante journey, or Virgil, who holds Dante's hand as far as he can go, but then in the end, Dante has to go on without Virgil, right? He has to go by himself, because he can't, use that hand anymore. In the end, obviously we're talking about adults going through this process. In the end, people have to come to that place. You could say in Eastern mystical traditions, it's the loss of ego, or in Western Christianity, etc., it is completely giving yourself to God, right? But in a psychological condition, it's like letting go and trusting. For me, when I was in hospital and I was dying, it's letting go of control. It's like, actually, I have to just let go and trust. And in the end, and as soon as I did that, I started to I was in trouble. I had 15% function of my heart and kidneys, and I was dying. And I just let go of control completely and allowed something else. I wasn't into Western medicine at all. Just let everyone do what they did. And as soon as I did, I started to heal. And so it was like a letting go to something bigger. And it's extremely hard, I think, if we've had a history, which may have trauma, et cetera, et cetera. Some of our process is allowing people to come to a place where they feel safe to trust. Even to trust the tide is a big thing when people have had trauma. And that can bring on crisis. Just the idea of just letting something bigger than us breathe us and restore us to our health. And it's a massive journey, and that is a crisis of the ego, especially when we're holding everything, we're controlling everything, and it's an incredibly dynamic state. So the answer to your question is, it's understanding that process to some degree, and recognizing that someone's in it, so you can act like the guide, you can act like the Virgil, to say, okay, this is where it feels like you are, and there is a way through this. This isn't just hopelessness, and that is in physical health, that is emotional health, that is spiritual health. It's all of that, in different anyway.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions from Annie. Then we may have to, because it's getting close to an hour. So the first question is, you mentioned that transference and countertransference can be helpful in session. Can you speak more about this? I thought that would come up. I put that one in there for a reason. Yes. So an active transference, say, for example, if someone is sick, right, and they trust, right, because where I have my main practices in Ireland, and in Ireland people jumped through
through the kind of industrial revolution, and they went straight from kind of agricultural revolution into the digital world. And that whole reductionist thinking was less embedded within the community, let's say, in terms of education, and people had more trust in going to see different types of therapeutic people. And it's like, there's a fella, you know, people will still say there's a fella down there in Tipperary that you need, that English guy, you need to go and see him, right? And there is a trust within that, okay? And what happens in a transference way, countertransference is a different thing, and I won't talk about that now, but in a transference way is what we're doing is we are transferring our hopes and our expression of health into the practitioner, okay? So we're giving up the control of our health just for the minute to another person, right? And that is a form of transference, okay? And what our job as the therapist is to, okay, and that is belief, and that you can engage with placebo can be part of that, which is linked to belief. But there is a belief maybe, and that there's a transference as this person can heal me. I'm talking entirely in a therapeutic way. And our job as a practitioner is to slowly give that back to them, actually, so that they can heal themselves. So at the beginning, they can't do it for themselves. And they hand it, that's a transference, yeah? And then you hand that back to them and give them back their capacity for their health, right? Like this is a classic kind of tale. About 20 years ago, I was treating this child, and often the you know, you get generations that come in, you know, the mother, the grandmother. The grandmother said, you know, I treated the baby, and that was all sweet. And the grandmother said, "Doctor, I've had terrible anxiety all my life. Terrible, terrible. Can you do something for me?" And so I said, well, look, hey, I'll have a look. So I sat down next to her and put my hand on her back, on her low back sacrum, whatever. And I could feel that she was holding shock. Yeah, probably always has. You know, probably it was birth-related shock, yeah. And anyway, I just like released the shock. And I thought nothing of it. I thought, well, that might be a little bit mildly helpful. And she went, oh my God, doctor, it's gone. The anxiety's gone. And I was like, oh yeah, come on. You know? So I thought nothing of it. You know, she goes, it's gone. And I was like, well, that's a nice kind of, you know, transference, like placebo belief thing going on there. Anyway, I met her again like 10 years later. 10 years later, you know, she was I don't know, I wasn't treating her, I was treating another member of the family or something. And she said, you know, doctor, the anxiety's still gone. I was like, what? I couldn't believe it.
I love it.
Couldn't believe it. Yeah, I was like,
So,
you're joking, you know. that's
I love that story. So I have a second.
Yeah.
I have a second question from Annie, but I'm going to wrap it in with a question from Monica, because it's kind of around the transparency.
Yes.
And then we'll probably
It's
wrap
another
up
one. That's
this
another good one.
recording. That's another good one. So Annie asks, you mentioned practitioners asking about protecting themselves and the difference between protection and transparency. Can you speak more about this? And Monica, I'm going to make them into one question. You mentioned the journey through our own wounds and the importance of transparency. How do you teach practitioners to embody this? And
yes.
And can you please give us a picture of how it would be taught?
It's a good question. So, I mean, so as we go on a journey of self-acceptance, right, which brings us into a place of compassion, we tend to, and you could say that relates intricately with dynamic stillness, because when we're in a state of dynamic stillness, we are transparent, don't we? You become transparent. That's part of a felt sense of dynamic stillness. But when we're first working as a practitioner, we resonate with people's grief, their anger, their upset, their sadness, whatever you want. yeah, there's a resonation. So, you know, they're angry, we're angry, we all feel angry, it's a nightmare. Yeah, that's completely normal. Yeah. But actually, in the end, you have to deal with, say, very simply, you know, you have to look at, okay, I'm angry. You know, I've treated this person who's angry. I've got even angrier now. I didn't even know I was angry, but I really was. Yeah. And in the end, you have to deal with, this is, I'm talking very simplistically, but you, in the end, you have to kind of, you know, allow yourself to feel your anger and, you know, whatever, bring some compassion around that anger and all that kind of stuff. And as you do that, the energy of the emotion moves and things soften, they become more transparent, they become quieter. We become more self-compassionate and self-accepting. As soon as, you know, if we feel whatever we feel, if we go, that's okay, I allow that, just very simple, right? And we do that in ourselves or another, what does it do? It breathes, it softens, it starts to lose its harshness around the edges. It starts to get into its own therapy. It's just the simplest thing in the world, isn't it? Just going, it's okay to feel that. It's okay. As soon as you do that, it changes the dynamic. So as we're working, we start to naturally become more transparent as we become more self-accepting and more, and you could say in another way, we start to deal with our shit. But, you know, you never do, but you just become more compassionate around it, right? Because that's the process. And that it's okay. And it's okay. And that it becomes more and more okay. So the idea, how that links up with protection versus transparency, if we protect ourselves, create a field of light and golden light, protect ourselves from the other person's energy, right? There's a lot of energy involved. There's a lot of boundary, and it's frankly can be exhausting. And in my experience and view, it's not helpful, right? But if we are transparent, what we're doing when we're transparent, say someone comes in a deep place of distress, which we all see, and we recognize one thing of transparency as a practitioner is recognizing what is ours and what is not ours. And all that is transference, countertransference, and that whole therapeutic process to actually recognize this person is in trauma. That isn't my trauma. Yeah. Because I understand my trauma and I'm slowly accepting and living with and being with my trauma. And that means this person's trauma is their trauma, right? And so I've become transparent, right? I'm not reflecting, protecting, putting out some sort of barrier against their trauma because it's just going to make it worse, right? Because so, yeah. And transparency, in my view, this is really simplifying it, comes from acceptance, yeah? And so that we won't resonate, we'll resonate less and less with patients, you know. And it's a question I get a lot, is that whole idea of protection. And some practitioners really advocate protection. I really don't. I advocate the opposite, which is to do with transparency, because that person's anger, rage, trauma passes straight through you because it's not yours, yeah? But that in itself has to embody some degree of self-knowledge and self-awareness and self-acceptance of your own trauma. Otherwise, you're going to resonate. And then if you have a tendency to resonate and you protected yourself in golden light, you're still going to resonate, I think, to some degree, maybe a lesser degree. But it's so tiring, you know, protecting yourself.
I get asked that a lot. I get asked that a lot too.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I tend to find if I'm tired, because I'm on the road a lot, if I'm tired, I might feel a bit more drained, but then I'm not really accepting where I am in the session. So if I accept, look, I am tired, then it seems to be the transparency just comes in. Right.
That's the point. So if you're exhausted and you go in and engage with a patient in a therapeutic process, right? And you just go, you know, I'm exhausted, and you allow that. As soon as you go, it's okay. I'm tired. It's okay. And as soon as you do that, it breathes, right? Everything goes quieter. That patient who's probably exhausted as well, by the way, the tide comes in and you both go, oh, thank God. And there's some restoration that happens. And so hopefully you both feel better at the end of it. Thank God.
Yeah, both get treated.
That's what it's about, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, thank you so much. We've come to an hour, so I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up. Ian, I really want to thank you for your time for this conversation. So for anyone that needs to know the dates again, Ian will be teaching at Moss Studios in Brunswick on the 22nd, 23rd of October this year. You can email me. I will put my email now in the chat. If you haven't got the registration form, all the details are on there, and you will get a receipt of payment. And this is a fantastic opportunity. I literally asked Ian a couple of years ago, and he couldn't come. And I
said
flew
no
to London. You did. You said no.
But Emma is relentless. She's relentless. Turns up at my practice in Ireland the other day.
I did.
I couldn't. There's no way I could say no.
I think the best thing is that
I said next year. That's what I said. I said I won't this year. Next year, okay. And then came next year, so I had to. So no, that's fine.
I mean, I think I'm being transparent. I'm being transparent. I'm stalking you.
Hey, listen, we'll have fun. We'll have fun. That's the point.
It's just a great opportunity for members of PACT, practitioners in Australia. Someone's asking, would you come to New Zealand? Well, we bring Ian over to the Southern Hemisphere this year. I'm hoping we can bring him back for future seminars.
Maybe the next one. Yeah, maybe not this one. I can't, but the next one, maybe. I don't. Yeah, next time, but not every.
So anyone in New Zealand wanting to come, it's just a short flight over the ditch. You can make it to the mainland.
The mainland. I don't think that's the right way of saying it. Right.
I don't think the Kiwis will like that.
Exactly. The mainland. Dear me. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tejaswini, for organizing.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ian.
Have a good evening, guys. See you.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.